President Trump seems to now be invested in this. Now, that's significant because I do not believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu can say no to President Trump. Right. Look, on the Israeli side, the problem has been that the military strategy is increasingly costing Israel internationally, costing Israel politically, without a clear endpoint. And there is no obvious political strategy.
So basically, we're in a moment of diminishing returns on the military side.
They were never going to do what Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted, which was surrender to Israel. That was never going to be done. Prime Minister Netanyahu is a master at saying yes, but. And the but will require all sorts of understandings.
Today is Monday, September 29, and this show is being taped just as President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are in the White House declaring their agreement on a deal for ending the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza that has been raging for almost 2 years. The outline is based on President Trump's 21 points and on Prime Minister Blair's outline for the transitional body of governance in Gaza. In addition, last week, President Trump declared that there would be no Israeli annexation in the West Bank. Put together, this string of events is nothing short of dramatic and potentially historic. To understand its implications, I will be hosting a few guests over a few segments. For the first segment, I have Ambassador Dennis Ross, who served as chief negotiator and mediator on behalf of the U.S. for the negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. He will discuss the art of mediation and the path to an agreement. Ambassador Dennis Ross. Dennis, it's great to have you back here on the Insights podcast. We're speaking today on Monday, September 29, which is a dramatic day in the evolution of the Israel-Hamas conflict that began on October 7, 2023. We are almost 2 years in. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu is supposed to meet President Trump in the White House following 3, I believe, historic turning points. Number one is that President Trump ruled off the possibility that there will be annexation in the West Bank. Second is that President Trump put forward a 21-point outline for ending the war in Gaza, which seems close to the zone of possible agreement. And third is that Prime Minister Tony Blair put forward his outline for how to control and govern Gaza in the transition period following the end of hostile activity. So Dennis, first question to you, how serious and meaningful is this moment?
I do think the moment is quite significant for a variety of reasons. First of all, President Trump seems to now be invested in this. Now, that's significant because I do not believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu can say no to President Trump. If President Trump is serious about following through on it, and he is sending that signal, although we'll know more today after their meeting and what they say publicly. But number one, you have this administration, which has given Prime Minister Netanyahu a license, a kind of free hand. We're now seeing it look as if that free hand is now coming with a sell-by date, that the president has in effect allowed Prime Minister Netanyahu to pursue a strategy in Gaza which never had a clear endpoint other than a total victory, the image of Hamas surrender and defeat, something that might have been highly desirable at a certain level, but also there was no way to actually produce that. Even now, the insistence of this government on the Israeli military to carry out the operation in Gaza City, that necessarily produced an IDF approach that said, okay, we can't really do it until we have most of Gaza City evacuated. Now, there's 700,000, the IDF is saying, have left Gaza City, leaves 300,000 roughly. It is impossible to believe that among those 700,000, there weren't a lot of Hamas fighters who were disguised and mixed in with all those who were leaving who weren't being checked.
So Dennis, you're actually beginning to dive a little bit into the complexities of the Israeli political security approach to the war in Gaza, which I'd like to go back to maybe in a few minutes, but I do want to ask you now. You were the mediator. You were this American who's trying to bring those sides together, and you played that role for over 8 years, right?
Yes.
Across different administrations. So this is a moment of tremendous American mediation led by Witkoff and Kushner and their teams. I do want to ask you to take us into the seat of this mediator. First of all, can you please describe the moment or the process that is and the dynamics that actually lead to a convergence around what we call ZOPA, the Zone of Possible Agreement? When does that happen? Why are we here right now?
Oh, wait. I'm going to answer it, but I also want to be careful in answering it from the following standpoint. This is not a normal administration. This is not an administration that develops teams of people with a great deal of expertise to deal with all the technical questions. So because you have Steve Witkoff, who's been made kind of the uber mediator, so he's responsible for Russia, Ukraine. He's responsible for Iran. He's responsible for this issue, Hamas. He's responsible for normalization. He does not have a big team. He doesn't have a team with a big bench of historic expertise, great familiarity with all these issues. So this is not what we would have traditionally seen in terms of a mediation effort. So he is working, to be clear, with Jared Kushner, with Tony Blair. These are not competing plans. These are sort of emerged, I believe, with a great deal of input from Blair and Kushner to produce these points. Blair has been going back and forth between the different parties. He has been playing the kind of traditional role that a mediator plays, because you don't come up with 21 points unless you have talked enough to all sides to find, as you described it, the zone of agreement. Where are the points of convergence? Recognizing each side is going to have a series of points that are hard to swallow. But because you've come to understand what each side can basically not just live with, but what each side needs. Mediation is not about reconciling wants or aspirations. It's about reconciling needs. So
this is actually a very, very important point. So first of all, both sides come to any conflict with, you may say, unrealistic expectations. They want to achieve a lot. An agreement emanates when both sides understand that they cannot achieve their goals through military pursuit, which is often described as mutual exhaustion, meaning the Israeli side is exhausting its ability to achieve its declared goals, and also Hamas is in a very difficult situation, which now creates ripeness. In an earlier conversation, when I had you on this podcast earlier, you said timing is to diplomacy what location is to real estate. So we're now talking about this specific timing so what in the Israeli strategy is not working to create the openness, to create the ripeness, and what on the Palestinian side or the Arab side creates the conditions for ripeness? Let's start with the Israeli side.
Right. Look, on the Israeli side, the problem has been that the military strategy is increasingly costing Israel internationally, costing Israel politically, without a clear endpoint. If it was very clear how this was going to end and when it was going to end, and the application of force was unmistakably tied to a political strategy, the timing could have worked for Israel. But there is no obvious endpoint, and there is no obvious political strategy.
So basically, we're in a moment of diminishing returns on the military side. This is big point number one.
Absolutely. The second thing is, even on the issue of timing, it feels like to me Prime Minister Netanyahu understands that President Trump has basically given him a timeline and he's exhausted it. There is what, like on a milk carton, you have a sell-by date. It feels like with President Trump, there is a sell-by date. We'll know more after this meeting to see how true that is. But it also, from the standpoint of timing, it does appear as if the patience that President Trump has had for the Israeli strategy has basically, I think it has passed. I think
so that's the timeline. The diminishing returns on the military side, the timeline, the international pressure. I would like to add another thing that I think really pushed Israel, and that is the inability to get significant amount of Palestinians out of Gaza. I think that was a goal, an undeclared goal of the war, to push the Palestinian population to the Egyptian border and then kind of have them move out. This failed. Egypt held steady. Other countries didn't take Palestinians. Really, an insignificant number is left. So essentially, Israel sort of understood that it may end up being responsible for this huge population that has been displaced by the war in southern Gaza. So that, I think, a major strategy that failed as a strategic option to negotiations, what we call a reservation point. So 4 big things that you are mentioning. Anything else that you think that brought Israel to this moment?
I think it's more than anything else. I think it's a recognition that Israel can't sustain this without support from Trump. And if it looks like Trump is saying, look, I gave you as much time as I could, I gave you as much as a license as anybody could, basically you have exceeded the time that I could continue to go along with you. I think one of the things to be very mindful of, these meetings that the Arab leaders had with President Trump, they unmistakably had an effect. And I can say, I know this for a certainty, when the UAE went public, Lana Nusayba went public with her interview with the Times of Israel, speaking about a red line as it relates to annexation. You can take as a given that this was what was being said in public, but it was preceded by very direct messages to the Trump administration about what the consequences of annexation would be. Those messages were then reinforced by the Saudis and others, that if you want to look to the future, you want to look to normalization, annexation will make that impossible. There was
Yes, so that's actually leading to the ripeness on the American side. So you're saying that the American side, first of all, gave Israel a leeway to pursue the military action, and the military action did not deliver a decisive victory against Hamas. Number 2, Israel was entertaining the idea of annexation, and the Arab side pushed on the American side with very clear message. So the Americans pulled the reins on annexation, which basically means that if there's no annexation in West Bank, probably also not in Gaza, it means that there has to be a political solution. There's not going to be an Israeli overtake of Gaza. And the Americans actually see, I believe, also a path to very significant diplomatic achievement. We call it the Nobel Prize path. But basically, there is that opportunity as well. So all of these things are kind of bringing the American side to lean in and try to end the war. But let's speak about the Palestinian side, and if you wish, also Hamas. What is their incentives to move forward now with the deal?
For them, they still will see this as survival. They were never going to do what Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted, which was surrender to Israel. That was never going to be done. Now, they won't call it surrendering, but acquiescing, I'll call it acquiescing to an Arab plan is different than surrendering to Israel.
Yes, Trump's 21-point plan is close enough to the Arab plan that actually Hamas could say that they're saying yes to the Arab plan as opposed to an American or an Israeli plan.
It's saying, agreeing to. I actually say acquiescing to the Arabs they can do. Now, they can do it for a variety of reasons. It gives them a kind of cover. They're still going to get Palestinian prisoners released because that'll be part of the deal. They will believe that under these circumstances, whoever is coming in, whatever the makeup is of this interim administration, they will believe they will be able to recoup over time. Look, this is an ideological group that will always think that over time it will succeed. And if it survives, that's enough for success. And it will point to the release of prisoners as a victory.
Right. So basically what you have with Hamas is, at least according to the agreement, there is no military wing of Hamas in Gaza. There's no participation of Hamas in the Palestinian political system. These are 2 big wins for Israel. But only the military leadership leaves, which means that the grassroots leadership of Hamas remains in Gaza and can still play a role. According to the proposed agreement, I think, by the way, it's a very bad idea. I think there should be a push to get Hamas out of Gaza altogether, also on the civilian side and the economic side. But right now, this is what we have in the deal. And the other thing is, of course, a massive, massive prisoner release, including allegedly between 100 and 200 what we call heavyweights, meaning people who have committed heinous murders and are sitting in Israeli jails for life. So, we've tried to describe the ripeness. Why now? But I do want to ask you, as a lead negotiator, mediator, this is an outline. Do we need to transition to an agreement? And if so, how does this transition happen?
Look, the reason that this is an important question is I think in the meeting today, Prime Minister Netanyahu is a master at saying yes, but. And the but will require all sorts of understandings, and it will take time to negotiate those understandings. Now, there's a practical need to have those understandings because this all has to be implemented. And the details of just the challenge of a phase out of Israeli presence and a phase in of this new administration with a stabilization force, those details alone will have to be worked out very carefully so there's no miscommunication, no misunderstanding by technical experts.
So basically what you're saying, based on your professional assessment, there's going to have to be an agreement. There's going to have to be more detailed coming on top of the Trump 21 plan and the Blair outline for government, and that's going to be signed. So that leads us to the next question, and that is, again, in your assessment, it's clear who signs for Israel. It's clear who signs for Israel, for Egypt, for Qatar, for the US, for other countries, for Jordan. Who signs for the Palestinians? Do we need a Palestinian signatory on such an agreement?
I'm not sure that you need it, although I think the Arabs may want it. They want this to appear as if it's the PA that has requested them to play this role. They want to rationalize what they're doing on the basis they are saving the Palestinians. That's what they're doing. This is not a favor to Israel. This is saving the Palestinians.
That has been a condition, by the way, what you just said, has been a condition of the UAE since day one, as I've heard it. And that is that there's going to have to be, their presence in Gaza is going to have to be on the basis of an invitation that comes from the Palestinian side.
Absolutely. That's been consistent all along. And by the way, I can tell you, I know this for a fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu never objected to that. What he objected to was the idea that the PA would have an ongoing role where they would be, in effect, the governing party in Gaza. Now, you don't have that, although you do have PA participation in this administration.
That's clear, although I do think that no PA in Gaza is a deal-breaking principle, meaning if Israel holds on to that, there's not going to be an agreement, in my view.
No, I agree with you, but that's what, see, I think that's one where President Trump is saying, you have to do this. There are the points where it'll be the equivalent of no annexation. That he will be blunt on those points where the Arabs say, without that, you don't have us.
Friends, this was the first segment of our discussion of the outline for ending the war in Gaza. With Dennis, we explored the state of the negotiations, agreeing that dramatic progress was made, but there is a long way to go with many pitfalls before the war really ends. Thank you for listening.